Hi there, partner. You're listening to Pop Partisan, a podcast that brings real-world issues into pop culture worlds for a non-court-ordered reason. We answer ridiculous questions like, what does mandatory military service look like in The Legend of Zelda? Does Cthulhu represent environmental catastrophe? What will we learn about open borders from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
That'll be fun.
Indeed it would.
Then again, I wrote those, so I might be biased.
We're taking all of your favorite pop culture indulgences and trouncing them with a healthy dose of real-world anxieties.
So buckle up.
Buckle up nice and tight.
Did I sound manly saying that?
Today, we're going to be talking about one of
my favorite series.
Not my favorite series. I don't think I ever watched this when I was a kid.
Until I forced you to, like, a week ago?
Yes.
Well, it was one of my favorite series when I was 4, called Thomas the Tank Engine.
And we'll discuss obstacles the characters and setting would face if presented with an energy crisis. I am only familiar with Thomas the Train Engine from a model train perspective. I used to get the little trains that you would put on the wood tracks, and that was my experience with Thomas the Train Engine.
And that's it?
I got it. That was it. I did not watch the TV show. I had other less educational TV shows that I needed to watch. I was a very busy 5-year-old.
For those of you who are like Anthony and might not be super familiar with the Thomas the Tank Engine universe, or as I like to call it, the Tankiverse.
Not to be confused with the Twitter-verse of communists.
So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Thomas the Tank Engine and the Tankiverse, first off, I feel sorry for you. But to catch you up, Thomas and Friends is a kid series about choo-choo trains that takes place on the fictional British island of Sodor. It started as a book series in the 1940s, and then from there took off to become a TV series, merchandise, costumes, one of which I proudly donned as a 3-year-old and 23-year-old. Lots of other memorabilia that fetishized the British and trains more than was probably necessary.
And it's still going on.
It's still going on?
It is. They have apparently a CGI show instead of, the models that they used back in the 1970s.
Only the original trilogy. The trains, of course, are sentient and talk without moving their mouths, and are based off of a series of British trains that ran on railways like the London, Brighton, and South Coast Rail.
Doesn't exist anymore.
Which doesn't exist anymore. Yeah, these were all British nationalized in, the 40s?
1947, I believe, after World War II, the British government decided that enough's enough. They were going to nationalize the rails.
The trains go on a litany of whimsical and cheeky adventures. Also, they're very insistent on using the word cheeky whenever they describe anything in this fucking franchise. Rebelling against other trains. Delivering Christmas puddings.
Oh, that's nice.
Being sad a windmill fell over.
That's a little sad.
Walling your friends behind a brick edifice.
I'm sorry, what?
And literally crushing surly freight cars.
This is a show for kids, right?
This is a show for children. Yes, it is.
And you watched this when you were 4?
Yeah, which explains why I'm such a masochistic bastard to this day.
That would explain it.
For all you eggheads wondering about the model of train, Thomas is based on a London, Brighton, and South Coast Railway class E2 0-6-0T.
Remember, it doesn't exist anymore.
But it was the second batch of locomotives built with extended side tanks, one of the more efficient designs for steam engines. These engines were built by Brighton Works between 1913 and 1916 to replace the aging Stroudley E1 class, and were primarily used for heavy shunting, which I don't know what shunting is, I'm afraid to look it up, and short-distance good trains in the London area and the South Coast. None of that really matters. Like all the technical stuff, all the rivet counting, that doesn't really matter. We're on the island of Sodor, where everything is bright and smiles and everyone's treated well and it's super happy.
Hold up.
Hold up 3 times?
3 times, and maybe a 4th. I'm not sure how aware you were as a 4-year-old, but I'm about to introduce some rather dark tendencies within the Thomas the Train Engine universe.
This isn't going to ruin my childhood, is it?
It might make you think about things differently when watching this seemingly innocuous TV show.
Oh no.
The author that wrote this book, or that wrote the series that's starting this whole universe, named Reverend Audrey, he was very involved in the railways. He was also a preacher, but he also was obsessed with the British Empire. So much so that he kind of carried that into his books.
Was he obsessed with the British Empire in a normal way or an unnormal way?
Not the good way. Basically, Sodor is a rather bleak place. I know they seem happy, but that's just a facade. But basically, Sodor is meant to represent the British Empire in her heyday. So we're talking mid 18th to 19th century to 20th century.
The part that they're all still proud of.
Yes, true. But basically, as you start to watch the show, you can sort of pick up a theme of imperialism, but also with a touch of fascism.
Oh no.
Main person in charge, the fat comptroller, rules all and rules the place with fear and expects his trains to abide.
His name is Topham Hatt. I take offense at is it fat controller or fat comptroller? Is he a fat? Is he a fat like accountant? I don't think I wrote down if it was controller or comptroller.
Anyway, he's fat. That's all that's all we're aware of at this point in time. But he rules his trains with a iron fist. They speak about him in hushed tones, and the environment that he oversees is a hostile work environment. It doesn't seem like a place I would go and work. Everything runs through the Fat Comptroller. And basically, this show is a rather conservative take on what your worth is in life. If you're not working, you are not showing your worth. These trains are ordered away with wherever they're supposed to go, and they are supposed to deliver and work. And if they're not, they are ridiculed. They are going to be put out to pasture or killed by sent to the scrapyard.
Yeah, it's a very bleak pasture, the scrapyard. We'll get to that in a minute.
Even if you're not working, you're going to catch the ire of the Fat Comptroller. For a show for kids, there is an early episode where a train called Henry, well,
We all know Henry, of course.
we all know Henry.
Well, I know Henry. You might know
Sam,
Henry.
who is Henry? Can you introduce us to Henry?
Henry is the train who is green and isn't little, but he's also cheeky because all the trains are described as cheeky at some point.
And he is very vain. He likes his green paint job. His green and red paint job looks like a Christmas train. But anyway,
Well, wouldn't you like your green and red paint job?
I would.
If you got a green and red paint job done?
I would. I think I would.
It's a very understandable issue.
It is. Well, anyway,
Not wanting to get rained on.
Henry does not want to get rained on, so he finds shelter in a tunnel, and he just stays there. Well, the Fat Comptroller hears about this. Henry is holding things up. They try to push him out of the tunnel. They try to pull him out of the tunnel, but he does not move. I'm not entirely sure how long this rainstorm lasts, but the comptroller had enough, and he decided, I'm going to wall you in for life in this tunnel.
Yeah, it didn't seem like that the rainstorm was. It didn't seem like the rainstorm was going on terribly long. I think he just didn't like the rain.
Yeah, and again, there is no compassion in the Fat Comptroller asking, Henry, hey, like, what's going on, bud? Like, can we check in with you? Like, what can we do?
That's exactly how he said it too. By the way, he was like, "Hey, bud, what's good, my man?" And he high fived Henry like 80 times.
No, he just said, I'm going to wall you in for the rest of your life. We're not going to make you work anymore. Enjoy irrelevance in Sodor. This is a kid's show.
The funny thing about the endings is they originally had Ringo Starr as the narrator talk about what's going on. It's clear that they don't let Henry out immediately and that he learned his lesson by being walled up for the rest of his life. In the George Carlin one that aired on public television here in the United States, they say that he got taken out and was able to run freely. I think there's an episode later on where you see Henry going about. So it is confirmed that Henry exists after this.
I'm glad Henry does exist after this, but that's just wild. I mean, if you think about it, for a young children's
TV show to reference the cast of Amontillado
yes,
from Edgar Allan Poe, that's like pretty heavy stuff. I
it
wouldn't even
is.
encourage like fellow 28-year-olds to read Edgar Allan Poe. But that's also because I have this whole thing against reading, which was established in earlier episodes, as a matter of.
So please go back and listen to them so you are all caught up on Sam's distrust for anything printed on
For academia.
and for
academia, yeah. To prepare for this episode, it was actually pretty fun. I had a really fun time tooting through the show on Amazon Prime.
You did not just say tooted.
For this, it's not binging, it's tooting through the show. But I mean it in a train sense, not another sense that we can't mention.
Okay.
This is a Chili's, Anthony. We can't use that language here.
You're right. The fine establishment of Chili's that we are currently at.
Yep.
For my part of the episode, I did the depressing things of looking up articles on Thomas the Train Engine, and
Thomas the Tank Engine, not train engine.
Tank engine, train engine, same thing?
Yeah, it might be. So for the central question today, we want to explore a hypothetical. So let's say an energy crisis strikes the Isle of Sodor, making all the coal disappear just like that. And we want to explore how a transition to a new energy economy might look for the island of Sodor and how they can make it happen.
My educated guess is, given that in the show, all these diesel and electric trains are made to be wily, deceitful, cheeky, and just plain obnoxious.
I was gonna make sure you added cheeky if you left out cheeky. So thank you for leaving in cheeky.
You're welcome. They are not winning, they being these electric and diesel trains, are not winning any hearts and minds.
These cheeky trains, you mean?
Cheeky, you're right. They are not winning any hearts and minds to change over this old guard, which are the coal-powered trains of the Isle of Sodor. Thomas and friends would probably be retired or sold for scrap. Not sure how the consciousness of these trains work. Do they die? Like, can they be outfitted to use alternative fuel sources? I'm not sure how this works.
Well, that's what I want to explore first, is see what alternative energy source, given the geography of Sodor, would work the best just to make everything flow in an operatable way. The island, as we see from a lot of the shots, runs predominantly on coal. So whether it's the trains that are running off of the coal or coal-fired power plants that we see in the background, we know that coal is king. And also, given the region, it's very apparent that they'd be operating very heavily on coal just because they're an industrial hub.
Mm-hmm.
A little context on the island of Sodor. It's a large island that's nestled between mainland Britain and the Isle of Man in the Irish Sea, right in the northwestern of where the British island is. It's off the coast of where the county of Cumbria would be, which is north of Liverpool. But of course, Sodor doesn't exist. It's not going to show up on maps if you go and look. This was just off of the Wikipedia, where we were able to see a fictional map of the island of Sodor.
What if you draw the Isle of Sodor on the map? Does it exist then?
Yeah, it's like chalk zone,
okay,
where if you draw something onto a surface, it immediately comes to laugh. To laugh.
To laugh. Laugh.
To laugh. It's Borat doing Fiddler on the Roof. So this part of England is a very old industry part of England that was famous for producing a lot of iron, steel, textiles, other things like that at this time. And so it was very beholden to coal power because they needed a lot of energy to run that industry, both in transportation methods and in location with those coal power plants, like I had mentioned before. So this region is going to be very, very similar to how the Rust Belt part of the United States looked back when it was at the height of its operation, which would have been roughly the same time, maybe a little bit later, going into the early part of the 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
But it has a lot of analogs to that kind of urban geography and the kind of industries that would have shaped the region from that sociopolitical standpoint.
I wonder if they have similar politics now.
So they kind of do. I looked at the map a while ago when they had an election, and I saw that north of England tended to be very Labour centric. which makes sense considering the history of the region.
Hmm.
Considering all of that, we want to explore what alternatives would be useful for this island. And the geography is very varied. So it's a lot of grasslands, a lot of little farms, but there's also mountains. So it's very complex, and we sort of see it just through the vantage point of these trains. What I think would work is wind power would provide Sodor with a sufficient amount of clean energy. Right now, that part of mainland England near where Sodor should be has a preponderance of wind power. The UK began to invest a lot more into wind power around 2007, 2008. And since then, wind power actually accounts for a fifth of energy in the United Kingdom. It's mostly in the north, but fortunately, that's also where Sodor is. That would work as well, in my mind. So Britain actually has over 10,000 wind turbines in the United Kingdom. About 8,000 of them are on land, and about a little over 2,000 of them are offshore wind turbines. That could sufficiently power the island. You just have to retrofit all the trains.
Yeah, I think that's a good step in the right direction. Would that be enough though? I mean, because obviously a fifth for UK's energy is good, and obviously the geography fits into it, but there's still, you know, 4/5 of the energy market left open. So I'm not sure how nuclear power on a train, but I'm sure with an island.
Just a speeding bomb, right?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, it wouldn't be great, but at least the bomb would be mobile. So you know, if the reactor,
That's the issue, is just having it mobile.
I
That's
mean,
what everyone's worried about.
if the reactor goes critical, you could just be like, all right, we're just going to send it over to the other side of town and you know not deal with it.
The other side of town. What?
So I think from an island perspective, a nuclear reactor on the island would be another good alternative, a good alternative for energy. As to the trains themselves, I sort of am thinking something along the lines of Snowpiercer, which is a dystopian. I think it's a book series,
Super train.
but also it's a movie. Basically, Snowpiercer is a train that operates on what is known as a perpetual motion engine.
Oh, I thought it was nuclear.
It's not nuclear. What they call it is the engine.
Oh, and then the perpetual motion is, I remember. So important question though. What would Snowpiercer's if Snowpiercer existed in the Thomas the Tank Engine universe, what would his name be? And what would his personality be?
He'd probably be energetic, right? Because he just has he has a fuel source that does not run out. So he's probably bouncing off the walls, always wanting to go.
So it's like Charlie Sheen, except a train.
Yes. Yeah. What would his name be? I would probably, because I like alliteration, um, Sigvald.
when you say I like alliteration, you're supposed to have somebody immediately in mind. Like you're supposed to say, what's his name?
Sigvald.
Okay. I was just gonna go with Charlie Sheen from that comparison earlier, but whatever floats your boat. Yeah. So how would they actually? Well, let's explore that again. How would they get the new energy source across the island? How would they roll it out? Pun intended.
Well, I would imagine they would use the trains to transport whatever they need.
To render them obsolete.
Right. Watch your replacements come in, train your replacements, you know, capitalism.
Yeah, no severance package.
No no.
Just the scrapyard.
No, scrapyard it is. You are no longer valuable. You don't work. No severance for you.
I think the turbines would have faces and names too. They'd be named things like Lil Breezy, Chris Turbine, or Fred.
Yeah, I like those.
Plenty of options.
I'm not sure if the nuclear reactors would have friendly faces. They'd probably be a little wonky.
I think the nuclear reactor trains would be like the biblical images of angels, how they just look like these crazy things with eyes floating around them. And they're just like these balls of energy.
12 wings. Yeah, I think I agree with you.
But yeah, one of the obstacles I think that would like prevent a big transition to a different energy resource would just be how it would get distributed both to the trains and also to the population. So the Isle of Sodor is home to a handful of small towns, just are scattered across the island. I think there's like 5 or 6 that are noted on the map that we looked at. So the big thing would just be to make sure that there's a energy grid that would be able to distribute that, or there's power lines. And you see in a lot of shots of Thomas the Tank Engine, so those could do a decent job at distributing energy across the island. The question is whether or not it can be retrofitted. So that turns into a bigger obstacle once you get into that sort of minutia of how going from a coal power plant to a wind turbine installed on that same space, giving a similar input, and how would that impact it. But obviously, we don't know like the caliber of power and energy that's going through some of these power plants and the output from trains. So it would be kind of difficult to
For
calculate.
sure.
But none of us want to put in the energy to do that kind of math. It's a weekend. We're taping
We,
this on
we
a
are.
weekend.
We are. I don't. My brain is mush on the weekend, so
Although the good news is, Sodor operates with a sort of municipal fascist decision maker calling the shops, the Fat Controller, aka Sir Topham Hatt. So it means they could arguably get that sort of stuff done quicker if there was that same unilateral control or that same unilateral decision in order to roll out a transition of energy.
for sure. As much as fascism is not something I support, it would mean that these things can be rolled out, and there aren't going to be many obstacles in terms of anyone else getting in the way of Topham Hat finally getting rid of the lazy trains that he wants to get rid of and replacing.
Or the cheeky trains. The cheeky trains are the real bastards.
They are cheeky bastards.
Yeah, so he does have control over this distribution network. And we know that there is a mayor within Sodor, but it seems like for the most part, all of the local decisions are made by Topham Hatt.
Mm.
And the mayor may just be like, a shill elected official. And Topham Hatt is like the Dick Cheney of the Isle of Sodor, making all the shots and shooting people when they go quote unquote hunting.
There's something there with regards to private industry experts co-opting a political entity
Or just a municipal governance.
or municipal government. Yep.
Oh shoot. Did we just stumble across another episode? We're gonna do another Thomas the Tank Engine
We
one?
could.
Right after this, we're going right into talking about how Topham Hatt is Dick Cheney.
I love it. All right.
So we were talking about the obsolete trains a little bit earlier, and I think it's worth noting to talk about the process of retiring a train, just how excruciating it is on the Isle of Sodor.
Mm.
It seems like it's much more excruciatingly painful and ugly on the Isle of Sodor.
Mhm.
So there is an episode where we see the scrapyard, where trains are scrapped for parts in a seemingly brutal process that involves rusty tools and ripping old trains apart quite brutally, which I actually looked up and is relatively true to form to how they used to recycle old trains back in the day. So in the show, trains are routinely tortured and ripped apart, not usually seen on camera, but it happens in the universe of the show, I guess I should say. Usually it's the ones who are being assholes who are tortured and ripped apart, but we see the train scrapyard in one episode where rusted old retired trains are littered across like somebody forgot to come up and clean up after a rager. And again, they're ripped apart because they're no longer useful. So this is another instance of that authoritarian element where your work defines you and your value to what you can provide your society.
Exactly. Again, this is a TV show for kids.
This is a TV show for kids. We can't stop
Yes,
saying that.
I can't get over the fact that this sort of, if you want to be useful and serve society, like that's what you do. You work.
If you want to be real useful, you got to be a functioning train.
That was beautiful. Can we expand upon that?
Just pretend I didn't do it.
Okay.
Keep talking. Use your words, not your singing words.
It looks like, and these scrapyards, right? They were pretty efficient. They could get through 2 to 3 trains for scrap a week. So it doesn't look like Thomas and his friends will be waiting around long in the scrapyard to be done away with and recycled.
And that was the common method in the 1920s and 1930s to have these scrapyards, which actually used to function as where they would end up building the new trains as well, just because all the parts were localized there and it was easier to build a new train on site than to ship parts to a different building facility in order to build up a new thing. And yet generally they were scrapped due to obsolescence, fancier new trains coming around and making it impractical to have some of these older models on the rails. or whenever a smaller rail company was bought by a larger rail company. So they ended up acquiring the trains, and they wanted to make sure that they were all on brand, so to speak. So they would scrap those and build new trains. It is actually pretty sad. In researching for this, I saw a video of a technician ripping off the front faceplate to an engine, as in the faceplates where all of the faces are on the trains in the Thomas the Tankerverse. And it was just mortifying because I could never not see it as a face. And it's in one small part because of watching so much Thomas the Tank Engine as a child. So it was a little excruciating to see that.
It sounds very traumatic.
Oh, it was traumatic.
I hope you can get over that.
No, I watched it yesterday and I didn't sleep all night, which is why I have these rings around my eyes.
Mm,
But I also always have these rings around my eyes.
I'm sorry to hear
This is translating really well for radio, right?
that.
It's not even radio, it's a podcast. So speaking of Sir Topham Hatt, the fat controller, um, I want to ask you, with the exception of him being like Dick Cheney, who you think would be a similar analog to him in the real world?
I did a little research on this Sir Topham Hatt individual, and actually, they sort of in the CGI version, they've made him a little bit more kinder. We're gonna stick to the actual real OG series.
The farther back in the series you go, the nastier this motherfucker is.
Yep. Anyway, he is described as a really brilliant engineer, but in the episodes, he seems to be rather lazy, very commanding, but also very lazy. You know, someone that I would not go to bat for or work my ass off for because he doesn't feel the same way about work for himself than he does for other people. He heads over the trains, and he rules with an iron fist. And he is meant to sort of be a stand-in for some of these mega titans of industry.
Yeah, robber barons, right?
Robber barons, exactly. And we are more familiar because we're Americans, with the American robber barons. I'm sure if you go back, Britain has theirs, but we're going to focus on Americans. A few that come to mind would be Andrew Carnegie, who was the sort of
Who was
godfather.
Scottish.
He was Scottish. He was.
But he did all of his work in America, yeah. I just wanted to trip you up on the technicality.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. So you have Carnegie, who was the steel godfather. You had John Rockefeller, who was the oil magnate. Those are really the first two that sort of come to mind when you think of robber barons. The reason why they were so
successful
was oil and steel were the driving factors of the American economy.
And especially industry of that time.
Exactly. And for much into the 20th century, it still remained true. And if you look at those two individuals, Topham Hatt really, for all intents and purposes, represents those ideals, those sort of mannerisms, because these two individuals were not known for their generosity and their kindness to either other competitors and their workers.
He's some kind of capitalistic Pillsbury Doughboy. No, that's a terrible sound.
Who is Topham Hatt to you, as someone who's watched the show more than I have and has a little bit more grasp on who he is?
So for me, Topham Hatt is a bullying aristocrat who punishes those who don't adhere to his orders. It's someone in demand of great control over the affairs of the Isle of Sodor, despite not being the principal decision maker from an elected perspective. But we can think about Sodor for the sake of argument as operating similarly to a business. And when I was prepping this episode, I really want to compare him to Rockefeller to tie it back to energy policy and politics there, because both men like to have unilateral control over an industry in their respective areas. Rockefeller famously used horizontal integration and started that off as like a practice when it comes to monopolistic operation, just to maintain control over operation of Standard Oil, which of course broke up after antitrust lawsuits to go on to become like Chevron and ExxonMobil and a handful of other companies.
Wait. You said handful. Do you know how many?
No, I just remember seeing ExxonMobil and Chevron were like the spin-offs from Standard Oil.
Chevron and Exxon are part of that, but there were 32 companies.
There were?
Yeah, 32 companies that came out of busting up Standard Oil.
Oh, wow, that's crazy. So it's no surprise that Rockefeller was worth like $400 billion.
He made a lot of money.
Dang.
A lot of money.
That is insane. But I want to compare him to Rockefeller, like I said, but I actually think Topham Hatt might be more like Rupert Murdoch. He's an overseeing magnate across his industry. He's brutal to his underlings and sits behind desks sending out other orders for others to go out and do his bidding. Not to mention, like, they're both bullying bastards.
I think Rupert is a more modern, obviously, example, and Rockefeller is just someone that we
grew up learning more about just because of American history.
Right.
So it's like we're going to be more contextualized around those. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who would be very good analogs in British history, within British business history, that could work well for this. Like the people who probably ran the show before nationalization of rail in 1948?
1947 was when the act was passed.
Yeah. So I'm sure I'm sure that there was plenty of operators and owners of rail industry that were very, very prevalent before Britain nationalized rail in 1947.
For sure.
So with all that being said, let's revisit our central question, or whatever I said at the top of the episode, in order to spark this discussion. What would Thomas the Tank Engine's new energy economy look like on the Isle of Sodor?
Less lung cancer and black lung.
Naturally, yes.
Let's start out with the dark side. All our trained friends would be boarded up, sent to the scrapyard.
Oh no, I don't like that visual.
Or melted up for scrap.
Oh, that's worse.
With their faceplates removed.
Why don't you just say, chopped off with like rusty hacksaws while they made eye contact with you. Just make it as bad as possible. And there's a single tear while the Thomas the Tank Engine theme song plays slowly.
We're no longer in Sunshine Station.
We're no longer in Sunshine. I can't do British. I don't know. I can't do British. I had 2 cups of coffee today. So I actually have a much rosier perspective on what it would be like. I think it would be much quieter. I think there'd be initiative in order to retroactively, retrofit some of these trains to be electric powered. There'd be more windmills marking the landscape. Obviously, there's the one windmill that I think it's Toby who gets upset at when the windmill gets destroyed. But there'd be more contemporary windmills, as in the white ones. And Sodor might have already done this with modernization if Sodor was a real place and continued to exist beyond the narratives that were originally written about Thomas and friends. It would either upgrade the machinery to be cool and new, or leave the entire island looking much like the scrapyard. Eyes simultaneously devoid of life and filled with life, eyeballing passerbys as if to say, "Kill me."
Well, that's definitely a rosier version than mine, where all the trains are sent off.
But the requisite thing is either both of our ideas for what would happen to the Isle of Sodor involve some caliber of nightmare fuel.
For sure.
It's unavoidable.
Life powered by nightmare fuel.
Life powered by nightmare fuel. I can't say the word nightmare, apparently.
Yeah.
Anyway, finish the episode.
Do you want to do the conclusion? Or
no, you do the conclusion.
Okay.
We talked about this. You do the conclusion. Jesus Christ. Now, here's a peek behind the curtain of what an amateur shop we're running.
Before we leave your ear holes today, we know there's a lot to discuss on this topic, or topics, and this discussion wasn't meant to be exhaustive. Let us know what you think, or if we made any egregious errors, which we definitely did. Email us at popularpartisan@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Tune in next episode where we'll discuss nuclear proliferation. Bye.
Bye. Pop Partisan is hosted and created by Sam Gerard and Anthony Tarzi. Logo by Emily Turner. PopularPartisan.com website by Joe Gerard. Music by Andrew LaVogue. Go find Andrew on Instagram, Spotify, and Bandcamp, and thank us later. Make sure to subscribe to Pop Partisan wherever you get your podcast fix.